The silence was the first thing that hit me every morning. It was the kind of stillness that seemed unnatural, a vacuum where the usual sounds of nature should have been. No birds. No wind rustling through the trees. Just the quiet, pressing on my chest like a weight. Even in the harshest winters back home, there had always been something, the whisper of the leaves, the hum of life, distant voices in the streets. Now? Nothing. I woke to the flickering light from a small oil lamp by my bedside. The glow did little to push back the shadows that clung to the corners of my cabin, as if they knew something I didn't. I reached for the half-empty bottle of whiskey on the nightstand, the burn in my throat a familiar comfort. The few things I kept here, half-empty bottles, some old war rations, a dusty rifle, were reminders of what I'd left behind. Or maybe they were just ghosts from a time I'd rather forget. The cabin smelled of stale wood and damp earth, the remnants of something once vibrant now faded, decaying. I stretched and yawned, then slid out of bed and made my way to the window. The frost had already begun to crawl across the glass, spreading like veins in a fragile body. Outside, the world was a blur of gray, as it always was. The fog that seemed to haunt the valley thickened as it poured down the hillsides, swallowing the landscape in its cold, unfeeling embrace. I should have known something was wrong. You can feel it in the air, in the way the fog doesn't move, the way it clings to everything like a parasite. The trees stood still, their gnarled branches twisting unnaturally upward, as though reaching for something that wasn't there. I pulled on my thick wool coat and grabbed my rifle, the weight of it in my hand grounding me as I stepped outside. The morning chill cut through me like a blade, but the cold was the least of my worries. I've lived through hell. Seen the world burn and the dead walk. Nothing in this world scares me. At least, that's what I told myself. That's what I believed when I picked up the gun after the massacre. That's what I believed when I left the city behind, trading it for this solitary existence. But out here, in the middle of nowhere, in the crushing silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. Something I didn't understand. Something I couldn't outrun. The fog thickened as I trudged down the path toward the woods. The snow crunched underfoot, but even that sound felt muffled, absorbed by the oppressive atmosphere. I paused as I reached the edge of the tree line. My eyes scanned the woods, my instincts alert. Nothing. Just trees. But something was off. The wind didn't carry its usual whispers through the branches. There was no movement at all, save for the subtle swaying of the trees. The world felt empty, but not in the way I was used to. It was a vacancy that wasn't natural. I stepped closer to the door of the cabin, the rifle still slung over my shoulder. My eyes drifted to the doorframe, and that's when I saw it. The scratches. Deep, jagged marks carved into the wood. Not the light scratches of a bear or something that might have wandered too close. No, these were deliberate, like something had reached down and tried to tear its way in. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry, and reached out to touch the marks. My fingers trembled, the cold seeping into my bones. Whoever, or whatever, had done this wasn't human. The back of my mind screamed at me to turn away, to get back inside, but I didn't. Instead, I crouched down, inspecting the ground. There were no footprints, nothing that would tell me who, or what, had been here. But I didn't need to see it to know. I could feel it. In the way the air felt too still. In the way the fog pressed closer, like it was watching, waiting. I forced myself to stand up and back away slowly, making my way to the cabin. As I closed the door behind me, a sudden gust of wind rattled the walls, as though it were angry at my retreat. I leaned against the door, heart hammering in my chest. That feeling, the one that had been gnawing at me for weeks, was finally making itself known. Something was out there. Something wasn't right. I sat down in the corner by the fire, my hands clutching the rifle as though it could shield me from whatever was coming. The walls of the cabin seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer. The silence pressed down on me again, but this time it felt different. Not peaceful. Not tranquil. Just empty. I didn't hear the knock at first. It came softly, just a tap at the window. I froze, breath caught in my throat. It was so light, almost as if the wind had done it. But I didn't think so. My eyes were locked on the spot. I didn't dare move. Then came another tap. This time louder. Clearer. I stood up slowly, rifle in hand, my feet moving against my will as if drawn by some invisible force. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I reached the window and peeked outside. The fog had thickened even more. And in the middle of it, a shadow loomed. Taller than any man, it stretched across the snow-covered ground, moving with a fluidity that didn't seem natural. I couldn't see its face, but I didn't need to. I could feel its gaze. The tapping came again, but this time it wasn't a sound. It was a presence. And I felt it in my bones. I staggered back from the window, my heart racing. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to press in around me, the air thick with something I couldn't name. And then I heard it. A whisper. Soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but unmistakable. "You've been marked." I froze, the blood draining from my face. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But it was. The night dragged on longer than it should have. The whisper kept coming back, just out of reach, like a melody played too softly for me to catch the full tune. I had never been a man to get caught up in superstition or fear, but the unease gnawing at the pit of my stomach was growing too loud to ignore. The wind outside had picked up, scratching against the cabin with a ferocity that made the logs creak under its weight. I tried to focus on the fire, but my mind kept drifting back to the marks on the doorframe. Who or what had left them? And why was I so certain it wasn't just some animal? I sat, rifle still at my side, eyes scanning the shadows in the room. The firelight flickered, casting long, distorted shapes on the walls. Every time I blinked, the shadows seemed to shift, just slightly. I couldn't tell if it was my mind playing tricks, or if the darkness was moving on its own. I grabbed the whiskey bottle from the shelf and poured myself a drink. My hands shook slightly as I took a sip, the burn of alcohol giving me a fleeting sense of warmth. But the cold in the room didn't go away. It settled deeper into my bones. I could still hear the whisper. It was getting clearer now, almost a hum. It felt like it was coming from somewhere inside the walls, crawling beneath the floorboards. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the wood floor, and moved toward the corner of the room. The house felt too small now, the walls closing in. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when the knock came. Not the soft tap from before. This time, it was louder. A heavy knock, the kind of sound that echoed in your chest. It was unmistakable, like a fist pounding on the door. I didn't move immediately. The rifle was still by my side, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this time, the knock wasn't meant to get my attention. It was an invitation. Reluctantly, I moved toward the door, my boots heavy against the creaking floorboards. The wind howled outside, the sound vibrating through the cabin like a warning. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling. For a moment, I stood there, waiting for the next knock. It never came. Instead, a shadow passed beneath the door, long and stretching. The fog had thickened again, but now it seemed almost alive, swirling around the cabin with an unnatural intensity. I opened the door just a crack, my heart pounding in my throat. The air outside was thick with the smell of wet earth, the fog now so dense I couldn't see beyond the first few feet of the porch. I stepped outside, rifle raised, scanning the dark. The cold bit at my skin, but the tension in the air made it feel suffocating. There was nothing. I turned back to the door, about to retreat inside, when a voice stopped me. Asterisk. You've been marked. Asterisk. The words weren't spoken aloud. They weren't a whisper either. It was a sensation, something deep inside my mind, scratching against the edges of my thoughts. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around. The fog had parted just enough for me to see it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, its features obscured in the mist. It wasn't a man. It wasn't anything I could identify. The figure stood still, unmoving. Asterisk. Who are you? Asterisk, I called out, my voice shaky, too loud in the silence. No response. It just stood there, its shape shifting with the swirling fog. I felt its gaze, though I couldn't see its eyes. It was as if it was waiting for me to make the next move. I stepped back, the rifle tight in my grip. "What do you want?" I asked, forcing the words through the tightness in my chest. The figure didn't move, but the fog seemed to gather closer, circling around me. The world had shrunk in that moment. The only thing real now was the presence in front of me. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that gnawing certainty that I was standing at the edge of something I wasn't meant to understand. A voice, this time clearer than before, echoed from the depths of the fog. Asterisk. No mercy. No escape. Asterisk. The words hit me like a punch. I turned, running toward the cabin, but my legs felt heavy, like I was moving through thick mud. My heart raced as I slammed the door shut behind me, the lock clicking into place with a finality that made me shudder. I pressed my back against the door, breathing heavily. The rifle shook in my hands as I lowered it, trying to steady myself. Outside, the wind picked up again, howling as if in response to something unseen. I should have felt safe here. I should have known that the walls of this cabin, the weight of the door, would protect me from whatever was out there. But I didn't. The feeling of being watched had only grown stronger, crawling beneath my skin, gnawing at my thoughts. I turned away from the door and walked to the window. The fog outside was moving again, swirling in tight spirals, as if it had a mind of its own. The figure I had seen before was gone, but the lingering sense of something being there remained, heavy in the air. I sat in the chair by the fire, rifle across my lap. I could still hear the whispers in the walls, that low hum that seemed to echo from every corner of the room. I didn't know how long I sat there, watching the fog outside, waiting for something to happen. The silence was almost unbearable now, the quiet stretching out, too wide, too deep. And then I heard it. A knock. Softer than before, but unmistakable. It was coming from the other side of the cabin. Not the door. This time, it was the walls themselves. The knock repeated, louder. Closer. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the air seemed to grow colder still. A gust of wind slammed against the cabin, making the walls groan. The door was no longer the only thing that felt like it was being watched. The voice in my head echoed again, but it wasn't just a whisper this time. Asterisk. You've been marked. No more mercy. Asterisk. And I knew, in that moment, that there was no escaping it. There was nowhere to run. The whispers hadn't stopped since that night. They were always there now, low, insistent, slithering into the corners of my mind, so close that I couldn't tell where the sound of the wind ended and the voice began. Every crack in the wood, every creak in the floorboards, carried the same relentless hum. I hadn't slept in days, not really. Not since the figure had appeared at the edge of the fog, not since the voice had told me, asterisk. No mercy. Asterisk. It lingered with me like a poison, a thought I couldn't shake. It was like the walls of the cabin were closing in on me, pressing tighter and tighter, until there was nothing left but the echo of those words. The fire was dying, the embers glowing weakly as I sat in the chair, staring out the window into the swirling mist. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this vulnerable, this exposed. In the war, I'd been trained to face danger head-on, to move through it, to survive. But this wasn't something I could face with a rifle. This wasn't something I could fight. I could feel it again, asterisk, that asterisk feeling, the one I couldn't shake. Something was coming. I couldn't see it. But I knew it was out there, waiting. And somehow, I knew that it was getting closer. A loud knock at the door shattered the silence. I froze, not moving a muscle. My heart slammed against my chest. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the rifle, the cold steel biting into my fingers. The heavy knock came again, but this time there was something different about it. It wasn't just a knock. It was a command, a summons. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I moved toward the door slowly, almost mechanically. My breath came shallow, my legs trembling as I stood before the thick wood. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. The knock came again. Louder. More insistent. I pulled the door open. The air outside was thick with fog, as it always was, but this time, it felt different. The fog wasn't just a presence, it was alive, pressing against me like it wanted to swallow me whole. I stepped out onto the porch, my boots sinking into the damp wood, my eyes searching the mist. And there, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the figure. It was as tall as I remembered, but now, it wasn't just a silhouette in the fog. It had form. It had shape. And I could feel its presence more than I could see it. The mist seemed to gather around it, swirling like a living thing. I took a step forward. The figure didn't move. "What do you want?" My voice cracked in the thick silence, a thread of fear woven through the words. It didn't answer. It didn't need to. I could feel it, its weight, its power, pressing down on me like an invisible hand. "You think you can hide from what's coming?" The voice, low and resonant, echoed from the figure. It wasn't the same voice from before, but it was close. The tone, the cadence, the malice, it was all the same. I lifted the rifle, aiming it at the shadow. "I'm not afraid of you." The figure didn't flinch. Didn't move. It just stood there, like it was waiting. Watching. "What are you?" I demanded, my finger tightening on the trigger. For a moment I thought it would speak again. But instead, the fog thickened, swirling around the figure like a protective barrier. The ground beneath me trembled, the air growing colder. I felt the temperature drop, my breath turning to steam in the freezing air. "You're the last of them." The figure finally spoke, its voice now distant, but still close enough to make my skin crawl. Asterisk. "The ones who were spared. The ones who didn't face judgment. You're all that's left." Asterisk. My mind raced. The massacre. The war. The bloodshed. I had seen it all. I had survived it all. But this was something different. Something I wasn't ready for. "You want me to pay for it?" My words came out bitter, angry, tinged with the guilt I had carried for so long. "For what I did. For what we all did." The figure tilted its head slightly, the motion slow, deliberate. And then, with chilling finality, it said, asterisk, "You will pay. You all will. The reckoning is here." Asterisk. Before I could react, the fog seemed to explode outward, like a tidal wave crashing against the shore. The figure disappeared into the mist, leaving only the swirling void behind. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. The fog had returned, thicker than ever, wrapping itself around the cabin, around me. The weight of the silence was suffocating. And then, as if the fog had taken a breath, I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible. A whisper. Asterisk. "No more mercy." Asterisk. I turned, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispers weren't coming from the fog anymore. They were inside my head. They were my thoughts, twisted, distorted. The words were no longer distant voices. They were me. They were my own voice, but they weren't mine. They were the judgment I had been running from, the reckoning I couldn't escape. I stumbled back into the cabin, the rifle still in my hand, the weight of it suddenly too heavy to hold. My mind raced. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in tighter, the air growing colder by the second. The fire had died completely. The only light in the room came from the dim glow of the fog outside. It filtered through the cracks in the walls, casting long shadows that stretched across the room like fingers reaching for me. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't just sit and wait for whatever was coming. But I couldn't leave either. The fog had cut me off. It was everywhere now, and it wasn't going anywhere. The figure had left, but it hadn't really gone. It was still there, in the mist, in the walls, in my mind. And that's when I understood. There was no escape. There had never been any escape. The fog didn't lift. It never did. It was like a constant pressure, a weight pressing down on me, sinking into the marrow of my bones. I had long stopped trying to reason with it. I had stopped trying to make sense of anything. The silence that followed the figure's disappearance had consumed me, but it wasn't true silence. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than noise ever could. The world outside felt closed off, suffocating, like a living thing coiling tighter and tighter around me with each passing second. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't slept. I wasn't sure if I could anymore. My body was betraying me, but it wasn't just a lack of food or rest. It was something else. Something darker, heavier. I could feel it crawling under my skin, in my veins, twisting around the core of my thoughts. It was the suffocating certainty that I was no longer alone. No, that wasn't right. I had never been alone. I had been marked. And whatever had left that mark, that presence, wasn't done with me yet. The whisper came again, closer now, so close it was as if someone was standing behind me, breathing into my ear. Asterisk. No mercy. Asterisk. I jumped, but there was nothing. I spun around, rifle raised instinctively, my pulse pounding in my ears. The shadows in the room danced and stretched with the flickering light of the failing fire. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe the figure again, standing in the doorway, waiting for me to finally understand. Or maybe I just wanted something to happen, to break the silence that was suffocating me, to make the pressure ease just for a moment. I set the rifle down and crouched by the fire, staring into the dying embers, my hands shaking too much to even try to stoke the flames. The cabin felt colder than it ever had, and I couldn't tell if it was the physical temperature or the chill that had settled deep inside me, into my very soul. I hadn't realized how long I had been sitting there until I noticed the darkness outside. It wasn't the usual fog, it was thick, deeper, more tangible. It hung in the air like a wall, blocking out the weak moonlight, choking the land with its presence. And then, through that suffocating darkness, I saw it. Just a flicker. Something moving, just beyond the edge of the porch. I stood up, moving toward the window, the creaking of the floorboards louder than it should have been. As I reached the window and pulled aside the ragged curtains, I saw it again, there, just at the edge of the fog. The figure. Tall, cloaked in darkness, its features still hidden. But this time, there was no mistaking it. This time, it was no longer a silhouette or a shape. This time, it was real. I didn't think. I didn't stop to question why or how. I simply reacted. The rifle was back in my hands, the heavy weight of it grounding me, steadying my racing thoughts. The door burst open as I rushed outside, the cold air biting into my skin, but the fear I felt was colder than the air. I couldn't even hear my own breath. It was as if everything else had drowned out my senses. The fog curled around my legs like it was alive, pulling me in, swallowing me whole. I stood at the edge of the porch, the figure now visible just beyond the tree line. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze, its presence, as clearly as I had ever felt anything. I was at the mercy of it now. Of them. There was no running. No fighting. There was only me and this presence that seemed to consume everything around me. "What do you want from me?" The question came out without thought, my voice rough from days of disuse, but the words hung in the air, a desperate plea. There was nothing left to hide behind. Nothing left but the truth of my own guilt, and the weight of the judgment pressing down on me. The figure stepped forward, slowly. The fog parted around it as if it obeyed its every movement. The ground seemed to tremble beneath its feet, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just another distortion of my mind. Asterisk. "What do I want from you?" Asterisk, the voice came again, but this time it wasn't from the figure. It was everywhere, inside my head, inside the walls, inside my skin. It wasn't just speaking to me. It was speaking through me. Asterisk. "I want you to understand. I want you to see the truth." Asterisk. The truth. I had spent years running from it. From everything I had done. The war. The decisions I made. The people I had killed. I thought I could bury it all, leave it behind. But it followed me. It always followed me. And now, it had brought me to this place. "You think this is punishment?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, more to myself than to the figure. "You think I don't already know what I've done? I already know the cost of it. I've been living it every day." The figure was silent, but its presence loomed over me, heavy, suffocating. The fog twisted in on itself, tightening around us. I felt it. The mercy they spoke of. The idea that there was still some semblance of a choice left. It wasn't a choice of life or death. It was a choice of understanding, of knowing what had been done, and what could never be undone. You think this is what it means to be spared? I said again, louder now, as though trying to convince myself. I'm the last of the survivors, the ones who didn't face judgment, who didn't pay. I know what I've done. I know what it cost me. But it doesn't change anything. The figure seemed to move closer, just within arm's reach, but its shape wavered as if it were more illusion than reality. Its presence seemed to press closer, like it was about to engulf me, to draw every last shred of consciousness from my body. The fog twisted around me, cold and suffocating. The truth. No, the figure whispered, asterisk. You've misunderstood. Asterisk. And then, in an instant, it was gone. The fog lifted, and with it, the pressure. But I didn't feel free. I felt empty. Hollow. Like the weight of the judgment had already passed, and there was nothing left but the echo of its truth. I stood alone, the cold night air now pressing in from all sides. The cabin was still there, but it felt like a distant memory. I wasn't sure if it was the fog that had lifted or if it was me. Maybe both. The mercy had come, but it wasn't a gift. It was a reminder. And the reckoning? It had only just begun.